So most Kaizen events are unsuccessful for a couple of reasons, and you're going to know those by the end of this video, but specifically, and more importantly, you're going to understand the 5-step process to focus on the theory of constraints to improve your Kaizen success rate, and thereby improving the impact of the business. Hi, my name is Chad Burrows. Welcome to my channel, and I help professionals just like you learn lean, Kaizen, and root cause analysis so they can maximize profit for their business or the businesses they work. Now, when it comes to Kaizen and continuous improvement, we need to be thinking about theory of constraints, and specifically the constraint that's slowing down the process. And when we talk about doing a Kaizen or launching a Kaizen event, we need to be thinking about that constraint. So there's 3 main Kaizens that I talk about on my channel, and that's Kaizen Blitz, Kaizen events, and then just do it. And when it comes to doing either events or just do it, a lot of businesses will just randomly go out and do Kaizen. And I think businesses should be more strategic in how they do Kaizen. And the reason I promote having a Kaizen strategy is because if you have a good methodical process for doing Kaizens, both events and just do it, you'll do both of promoting Kaizen and being a good cheerleader for Kaizen by having the just do it and getting that culture expansion. But you'll also have the Kaizen events reserved for those strategic Kaizens that's focused on the theory of constraints. So let's dive into the theory of constraints and walk through the 5-step process. The theory of constraints first step is to identify the constraint. The best way to do this is to use a value stream map. We've talked about this in other videos, but if you have a good solid value stream map, and remember, a good value stream map is a 30,000 foot view of the process, and it's a snapshot in time. For example, if you were to go out and do a value stream map tomorrow, you would have to almost take a Polaroid picture of that process. You're not updating it every day. You're going out and you're capturing the current state value stream map. How is it today? And depending on your business, you're going to need to determine some sort of a cadence on how often you're going to take that snapshot or that Polaroid picture. Now that we've established the current state, what is that going to do for us? Well, not much other than tell us what's really happening in the process. But we got to be comparing that to something, right? Now, some people may say, compare that to your future state process map, but that's not the right way. We got to compare this to something that's called the ideal state value stream map. And this is where you have your theoretical maximum capacity of everything. What I mean by that is you have 0 defects, 0 downtime, and 0 waste. Is that ever going to happen? No, it's not ever going to happen. That's why we call it theoretical max capacity. That's why we call it the ideal state. Ideally, we would want that to happen. So we should always be working towards that. It's also called perfection. So we have 2 things. We have the current state value stream map of where we are today, that Polaroid picture of today. We have the ideal state of the theoretical ideal maximum capacity, meaning that if nothing was going wrong, this is what we could do. And now we need something called the future state. So we need to say, okay, well, we know we want to be perfect, even though we're not ever going to get there. We know where we are today. What can we do to work towards that ideal state? And so you would go through your current state value stream map. You would look at the constraint, maybe the top 1, 2, or 3 constraints in the process. And then you would create a strategy, a Kaizen strategy saying, well, now I know based off the constraint list that I have, we're going to do the first Kaizen event on the number 1 constraint. And then once we resolve that, that constraint moves. And that's why it's called the theory of constraints. You're constantly chasing the constraint. And then it moves, right? And then you go to the next slowest process. And so once you have those Kaizen bursts on your current state value stream map, you would say, hey, when we're done with this and we resolve these, we know we're going to get these processes down to some predetermined cycle time. And so we know what the future state value stream map should be. So you can literally say, here's a snapshot in time with the current state map. Here's where we think we're going to be or where we're planning to be with the next future state step. And that way, when you get to that step, you take another picture and you archive the current state value stream map. So number 1, identify the constraint. Now, before we get to the next step, I have an opportunity for you, which is just to do a good deed for the day. And that good deed is all you have to do is click on that thumbs up button below. It's going to do 2 things. It's going to make you feel really good because it's an easy step and it's a good deed. And it's going to make me feel good because somebody gave me a thumbs up, but also it helps promote the video, which means that others that might be struggling with Kaizen and theory of constraints will have a better chance of seeing this information. And if you stick around to the end of the video, just for hanging out with me today, I'm going to share where you can get some free resources that I know you're going to love, but more importantly, I know you're going to use. Number 2, you exploit the constraint. Once you've identified your constraint, now you can put a Kaizen burst on the value stream map. I like to have at least 1 through 5 Kaizen events sort of lined up and in the pipeline, and the impact, right? The expected impact you're going to get out of those Kaizens. Another pro tip here is to have that value stream map visible, large. I'm talking printed big and printed on the wall, and then have those Kaizen bursts on the value stream map as well so people can see where the Kaizens are going to happen. Next step, number 3, is to subordinate to the constraint. So we know what the constraint is, right? We need to be strategic on how we're supplying resources to that constraint, right? From the upstream processes, meaning that if the upstream processes are faster, which they are because this is a constraint, if you don't manage that, you're just going to be feeding material to that constraint and it's just going to be a buildup and a mess with inventory. You don't want that. So you have to be very thoughtful about this, and you have to be methodical and strategic about how you're supplying that constraint. Likewise, you have to understand how you manage the process directly after the constraint, right? Because if you don't manage that process properly, then you're going to be constantly starving out that next step in the process because of the constraint. So strategic WIP here is important, understanding what WIP is necessary at that constraint. WIP meaning work in process, if you don't know, but you got to be strategic on that WIP so you're not starving the process right after the constraint, but you also have to be very strategic with the resources flowing into the constraint so that you're not overloading the constraint. And that's what we mean when we say subordinate to the constraint. And number 4, you want to elevate the constraint. Now, elevating the constraint simply means that once we've done all we can to squeeze everything we can out of that process, that constraint, we've Kaizened it to death, right? And we can't get anything else out of it, but we're still not able to meet the customer demand. We need to elevate the constraint and add resources, meaning that sometimes you might need to purchase a different machine, but you need to understand the ROI on that. Now, this is a tricky situation. I've worked with businesses where they thought they needed a $2 million machine, and after I performed the Kaizen, they realized they didn't even need a machine, right? They could squeeze more capacity out of that process, and they were like, wait, we don't need to cut a check for $2 million. You need to be very careful with how you're purchasing equipment, making sure that if there is a constraint, you just don't write a check, you actually do a Kaizen there. And on the flip side of that, if you've done your due diligence and you've squeezed everything you can out of that process step, make sure you still go back and perform an ROI before you cut like a $2 million check, and use math, right? Use metrics and data. Don't make decisions that's not data driven. This is where you can get into a lot of trouble. Once you've elevated the constraint, you step into number 5, and that's the pursuit of continuous improvement. Some call this the pursuit of perfection. And that's where we're constantly analyzing the process from our current state, future state, and trying to chase that ideal state: 0 defects, 0 downtime, 0 waste. So there's free resources I mentioned earlier. There's 2 ways you can get those. One is if you're on a desktop computer, just navigate up to the banner. There's a section up there you can click and you can get the free resources there. And then on any video I have on YouTube, including this one, if you just go down below and click see more, you'll have links there. You can just click on those and you'll get those free resources. Likewise, if you want to head over to my website, learnkaizen.com, you can find a lot of information over there, as well as some other free resources and even some courses. Go check that out. But don't leave today without at least clicking that like button and subscribing to the channel if you like this kind of content. I'll see you in the next one.